Okay, now as climate change intensifies, we're entering an era where there will be increased weather-related chaos. Given the numerous, varied and frequent natural disasters that are already occurring, climate change is now also been known as climate chaos. The primary concern here is how quickly and resiliently towns and municipalities can recover from these disasters. Well, let's get some insights from local government and revenue expert and Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group, Miyelani Holeni. Miyelani, good afternoon. Welcome to today, and thank you very much for your time. You know, when I saw the storm yesterday in parts of Johannesburg, Mpumalanga and Limpopo, and just the news coming out of the damage and infrastructure, I thought our municipalities and cities, can they actually cope with what we are seeing, knowing the many challenges that they are facing? What is your view, Miyelani?
Well, I think we've seen that municipalities are in a struggle, and the struggle that we are seeing calls for funds to be pulled from national government, from the disaster fund. We've seen the recovery fund that has been created, as well as the reconstruction, if we may put it in those terms, to help the different towns that have suffered various disasters. So that simply means that municipalities and towns and cities do not have nearly the kind of capital to be able to recover after any kind of a disaster, especially the likes of floods that we are seeing a lot more of. We've seen inclement weather, we've seen changes in weather patterns. So that is something that, is at least taking municipalities for a stretch, because there are other responsibilities and obligations that they ought to be looking at. And climate change is one that is bringing climate chaos for them.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned financial resources, but there's an issue of capabilities and there's an issue of capacity as well. I don't know what is your sense of where our local government structures stand?
So I think if we encapsulate, the whole exercise that is required, or at least the approach, is looking at this resilience of cities. And of course, that resilience of cities is one that is centered on capability, which is the skills that are required, the engineers that are required, the financial people to be able to create various models, as well as the labor to carry out, and the machines to be able to carry out, the various things. Of course, the capacity speaks to the allocation of resources equitably, but I just want to take it to the next level, which talks about the anticipation, because anticipation is one of the things that if you don't anticipate, you are not prepared. So it means there ought to be better planning systems and forecasting systems, long-range forecasting for that matter, to be able to see some of these events, coming through, so that there's better preparedness. And we enter into a space of climate finance more and more as we are dealing with some of the inclement weather that we are seeing. So that capacity, that capability, the anticipation, which would obviously lead to something that we call adaptation, which means that the system would be adaptive enough to be able to cope with some of the events, as we've seen, and we've highlighted before that we've seen 100-year floods in the past few months coming through the various places within South Africa. So municipalities ought to be looking how they prepare themselves with capability, capacity to be able to anticipate and adapt to some of these systems that are coming through, and the weather that is coming through and changes.
Are you aware if any of our municipalities and metros and them are undertaking at this stage a resilient strategy that you've just articulated?
Look, there are a few cities. I mean, we'll talk about, perhaps, the various, organizations that are thinking about this, like the Rockefeller Foundation, which is talking mainly to the like of the city of Cape Town, the city of Tekwini. We also have the C40, which is talking to the likes of the city of Tshwane and the other cities like city of Joburg. So there is already thought in terms of the cities. If you think of the metros that we have in South Africa, we have about 8 metros. And if it's only 8 metros, and the population of that those metros is a percentage, or about 20 to 30% of the rest of the municipalities in South Africa. So there's also a climate bill that is going through Parliament as well, which is looking at now the readiness of it. So those are preparations. But I can also tell you that, it's only the few cities that are thinking about, climate change and are starting to budget towards having at least a response to any of the changes that come through. But none of the cities are thinking about climate agnostic structures, different ways of building, innovations in terms of making lightweight structures which are strong and resilient and can withstand, whatever weather elements that are there, and be able to enable quicker construction should there be destruction. So few cities, and this is something that the climate bill we hope will also push the municipalities to be able to get onto, and the understanding as well as the budgeting of for climate change that we are seeing more and more.
I mean, in addition to infrastructure damage like we've seen yesterday, just in parts of Johannesburg, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and Midrand, and to infrastructure and assets like vehicles and buildings, there's a lot of disruptions that happens when you've had a terrible storm. And I mean, weather specialists and scientists are telling us it's going to get worse. I mean, we are going to be experiencing more and more climate chaos. So I'm just thinking about this dream of smart cities. Is it still possible? I mean, the president a few years ago was speaking about this beautiful smart city that's going to be built somewhere in Midrand or Modderfontein. I can't remember the name of that beautiful...
Lanseria.
Yes, Lanseria, yeah. I mean, is this just a pipe dream now, when not because people won't want to do it, but because of the impact and the devastation, the devastating disruption of climate chaos?
So I think we need to look at, the origins of smart cities. I think we view smart cities as cities that are able to for people to live, work, play, and be able to move in and out of those cities. It's easier, the traffic is better, or at least it flows in a direction which is calmer. And the buildings that are there at least are more technologically wired to be able to brought into bear some of those technologies. So I think we need to add climate smart cities. I think that's what we need to be looking at, because it's one thing going to construct new cities that are so smart from a technological point of view, but they also must be climate smart as well. So that is where I think, the issue of, smart cities as they are coming up should represent now, as we're saying, building the new cities using materials that are more resilient, materials which are lightweight, but yet very strong and accommodative of the weather and accommodative of the demands and the elements of that would affect them. So I think for us is rather than building new cities, we need to look at ways of designing even the current cities that we are staying in, such that those cities, should they be hit by any kind of flooding, there can be at least quicker responses, less disruptions to the telecoms, less disruptions to the electrical grid, less disruptions to the water grid. And those are, I think, the elements that ought to be done, because the new cities, as you say, are further from a time horizon point of view. The reality of the cities that we are living in is that some of them were built, with heavy concrete and facilitate flooding, as opposed to clearing of water, such as eThekwini.
Miyelani, because of the challenges that many of our municipalities faced recently, I mean, some of them are literally falling apart in terms of various services and infrastructure, whether it's sewage, sanitation, water, roads, and bridges, and all of that, is that they will completely disappear if they were in the middle of a very big tornado and storm, and they might not be able to recover. How important is recovery strategy under this new climate chaos world of ours?
Absolutely. I think, the recovery is one that, from a funding point of view, from a systems point of view, from a logistics point of view, and from a planning point of view. So all of those elements must be able to converge to be able to create, the means to recover. Because think of medical technology, think of medical systems, think of our health care system that, is also lagging behind to respond, to some of those. So in the recovery, as we would have seen when there are disasters, there are a couple of layers that, respond, within to the point where it unfolds to reconstruction. So the recovery aspect is one that is crucial. We've seen the likes of, China, for instance, when there are pandemics, they are able to construct hospitals within a matter of days as opposed to months. So those are some of the aspects that, we ought to be looking at of how do we then construct, aspects, which are required to aid, the recovery, such as, medical care, to host, the telecoms systems, the communications, and the electricity and water. So recovery becomes one of the greatest things. And I think it's one that ought to be given a lot more thought about, as well as the allocation of resources from a financial point of view, as well as the experts and training the various people that are required to play the role of response. So in a disaster, everyone else becomes anyone else. Anyone can become a medical person because they need to be assisting. So you need to be looking at a wider pool, as well as, not only looking at recovering from just, one aspect, but at least getting the skills within the cities, the municipalities, to be able to respond in a way that, at least allows, a quicker response as well as recovery thereafter.
Yeah, I think a metro like Johannesburg and other big cities and towns, they don't have to wait for the next big storm to happen. They need to be setting up, just listening to you, Miyelani, they need to be setting up climate change resilience war rooms where they spend every day not having a conference or a seminar or a workshop, actually crafting a real plan of action and how they're going to be doing stuff going forward. Because, it's upon us. Thank you very much, Miyelani Holeni, Local Government and Revenue Expert and Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group.